turn over the meeting to Prof tonight. I will quickly go over his profile. Very remarkable profile. Just to introduce him and welcome him and appreciate him for joining us. So Professor Biodun Adedipe is the founder and chief consultant at Adedipe Associates Limited. He has about 4 decades of postgraduate work and professional experience, cuts across university teaching, investment banking, project finance, management, financial consulting, as well as leadership in business and not-for-profit organizations. I mean, several times I see Professor Adedipe doing advisory work for First Bank and leading organizations. He's had an illustrious career that has taken him through the University of Lagos, the Enterprise Consulting Group, the World Bank for the African region, International Merchant Bank PLC, and First City Monument Bank. His technical expertise is wide-ranging, covering both corporate strategy, research, and economic analysis, solving complex business problems, and assisting clients to execute business solutions in line with their corporate strategies. He's a highly sought-after analyst and commentator on government fiscal operations and economic policies, like I said, and strategy design and execution of financial institutions, non-financial business organizations, and not-for-profit organizations, like he's doing for us tonight. And he has served in various capacities in government. He was a member of the Presidential Committee of Experts on the redenomination of Naira in 2008. He was a member of the Federal Government Committee of Experts on Expenditure Review, October 2010 to 2011. And he was a senior special assistant to the president, financial sector development in the office of the chief economic advisor in 2011. He's a professor today, and he also received a doctorate degree in industrial economics, specializing in corporate finance from the University of Lagos in 1989, and his bachelor's in economics is a first-class graduate from the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, in 1980, and he has bagged several awards in the process, including Sir Adam Thompson's scholarship as a visiting doctoral student to the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom in 1984. He's a member of several respected professional bodies, including the Institute of Directors, Nigeria, the Nigeria Economic Society, the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, and the American Economic Association. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like us to, give a warm welcome to Professor Adedipe. And we can do that by, putting that in the chat room to say welcome or a thumbs up. But please, let's give Prof a very, very warm welcome. Prof, thank you so much tonight for honoring this invitation and for being here to speak to us. I will turn the meeting to you now. I will
start on a note, and that is to put everything in context. For me, as a professional economist, that is on the one side. The other side of me is that I am not ashamed to announce that I'm a child of God. So that means when I look at issues, even though professional, issues, I take a look from the perspective of what God will want his children to do. And happily, this platform is that also where I can feel free and make reference to how the Lord wants me to approach this. So I will share my slides on the screen. Certainly, everybody present here, those who are not even present, will have access to the slides. But more importantly, the fact that I may, because of time, not speak to all the slides. But certainly, anyone I skip, you will have access to content. So for us to focus on the slides, I will turn up my video now so that my face won't be a distraction, to anyone following the conversation. Father, we give you praise and we thank you, Lord, for the privilege and opportunity to come together this evening. We commit these conversations into your hands, that which you have determined that each of us should see and also know. open our eyes and our minds to see, so that we may take that which will profit us and bring praise and glory to your name away from this meeting in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Now, the title is very simple and straightforward. Midyear Economic Review, which means we look at the first half of the year, and then outlook for 2026, which means what is the outlook for the second half of the year. The first month of the second half is almost gone. This Friday, it will end. So what are the issues? What are the drivers of the Nigerian economy? And where are the opportunities? So now I have what I call the macro context. And it is not particular to me. A couple of my friends also make reference to this. And that is, I trust God. That's foundational. But for every other thing that this with human beings, I trust data. Okay? And it goes this way. Now, in Genesis 15:5, as a foundation, and it's important for us, especially talking about the Nigerian economy. Now, the Bible said that then the Lord took Abraham outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That is how many descendants you will have. Now, there are three key elements here that should guide the way we interpret what is happening in the Nigerian economy and business environment, and even beyond globally. And those are: number one, you need to take a look. Many people don't look before they start making judgments about the economy. Oh, the economy is bad. It's in a very bad shape. There is nothing working in this economy. Okay? But when you look with an intention, you will also see. But what is now more important is how you interpret what you see. And I often remind my professional colleagues, economists, about this, that the two of us can look at the same data, but go off with different interpretations. But my interpretation is simply this, that anytime I look at any economy, and I'm often challenged by different clients, depending on where they do business around the world, to take a look at different economies around the world, and now tell them what I see. And I say, my attention is always on opportunities. Now, if you don't look, you cannot see. And also, you cannot interpret what you don't see either. Which means you need to look, then see, and then interpret. Like our MC said earlier on, we deal with data, no doubt, but data now is about interpretation. And how do we position ourselves? Now, the problems of developing countries are still common to them, but in varying degrees. There's food deficit, there's energy deficit, there's manufacturing deficit, infrastructure, and housing deficit. Now, the narrative, and this is where I begin to tell you what I see. The narrative about Nigeria is changing gradually. Number one, there is improvement in food availability, but little progress on affordability and sustainability, which means there is food, no doubt, it has increased, supply has increased, but we don't have it in such quantity that can dampen food prices. So there's a challenge in the area of affordability, and of course, challenge in terms of sustainability. Then, of course, we take a look at energy. Interestingly, energy transition is also going strongly in Nigeria, especially off-grid, with intensifying solar adoption. In fact, there was a report that came out about 2 weeks ago, yes, exactly Monday, 2 weeks ago, that talked about solar adoption in Nigeria, and that we are at 40-something% in terms of improvement. But not only that, there's also a recent foreign investor decision to build the largest solar farm in Nigeria as far as Africa is concerned. So, of course, a $500 million commitment to that investment. And of course, just this morning, I came across some news about what government is doing with it in regards of this, that there are a lot of off-grid power systems that the government now wants to integrate in order to increase power supply and delivery. Production boost driven by new investments in oil and gas. That also is a very, very interesting one. Widening participation of local entities and significant reduction in oil theft. Of course, we see the data shortly. Then domestic refining of crude oil and solid minerals. That is a major factor in what I describe as the saving grace for Nigeria when the war between US, Israel, and Iran broke out on 28th of February this year. We'll talk about that shortly. The manufacturing, interestingly, is dominated by foreign investors. In fact, MAN branch of Lagos, and the Lagos branch of MAN rather, reported that first quarter of this year, out of 10 new members, 7 were foreign manufacturers, which means there's new manufacturing that is also growing in Nigeria, but more of interest in that sector is coming from the foreign investors. Again, we see the data later. What is the position of manufacturing within our economy? Now, government revenue is expanding and being diversified. In fact, the tax receipts for the first half of this year was reported at 21.6 trillion naira, and that is quite significant. In fact, if you look at the last fact figure shared, over 4 trillion, and that is quite strong. Okay. Now, let me mention this, that when we talk about increase in government revenue, you have this, oh, it's money illusion. What is the value of that? And I always remind people about this. If 2 of us had children 20 years ago, and I decided to open an investment account for my child, you didn't do anything for your child. And I was putting in there, let's say for the sake of conversation, 10,000 naira every month over a 20-year period. Money not withdrawn, investment not redeemed, and that, of course, every interest earned is capitalized. I guarantee you that in 20 years, my own child at 6% interest rate per annum compounded will have not less than, that's minimum even, of 1 million. I think I said then 1,000 naira. 1 million naira in the hand of my child, 20 years after. Your own child has 0 naira. No matter the value of the naira, my child will still be better off than your child. So when people talk about money illusion, I just smile, okay? How about infrastructure? We are now delivering more enduring concrete roads in our reconstruction and renewal efforts. Airport terminal buildings are also being renewed. Railway network expansion. I heard recently, a couple of weeks ago, that the corridor from Port Harcourt to Aba is already operating. And of course, deep sea ports, target is 5 of them in very good locations that will change the narrative of maritime logistics in Nigeria. Now, how about what is happening globally? And of course, we all know that the big issue today globally is the Middle East conflict. And of course, the geopolitics that centers around Trump 2.0. Now, when I say Trump 2.0, the reference is to the Trump coming this second time is a lot more erratic than the one we had the first time. So we usually analysis separate between them. His first time we call that Trump 1.0. The current one we say Trump 2.0. Now, if a major global disruption happens, how do we interpret it? 2 things. Number 1, what is the nature of the disruption? Then number 2, we look at Nigeria where we are and are doing business. What is the buffer of Nigeria? The same thing we apply to your own organization anyway. Now, if you look at this particular crisis, the US-Israel war on Iran that disrupted the energy and fertilizer markets primarily, okay, it affected 4 commodities: crude oil, refined petroleum products, LNG, and fertilizers. Those 4 commodities. So we can then divide countries into 2 on that account. Which ones were importing those commodities from the Middle East? Which ones were not importing from the Middle East? So those importing from the Middle East will become vulnerable because they are dependent on the importation of crude oil, refined petroleum products, LNG, and fertilizers from the Middle East. Those that are independent, of course, are not vulnerable to that extent. Then we now come to buffer, and we ask the question, what is the position of that country with respect to external reserves vis-a-vis their monthly import bills, where we now talk about how many months of cover does the money in your pocket cover, assuming you don't sell anything whatsoever to the rest of the world, okay? And then secondly, we say, Do you have maturing foreign obligations this year? What kind of volume are we talking about? Vis-a-vis, number one, we measure it against your GDP. Then number two, we measure it also against your liquid external reserve. That is the unimpaired, that is uncommitted portion of your external reserve. So if we play this, then countries all around the world will fall into four categories. Category one, those that have weak buffers. That means external reserves very low relative to what they need to maintain a stable currency. Secondly, they are independent, so they don't import these four commodities from the Middle East. Second category, that one I painted green in this matrix, okay? They have strong buffers and they're also independent, which means they don't import these products from the Middle East and their buffers are very strong. The third category, weak buffers, and they're also dependent at the same time. Then the fourth one, strong buffers, but dependent. Question, where was Nigeria in this matrix when this war broke out, February 28? Interestingly, Nigeria fell in the green quadrant. That means we had very strong buffers in terms of external reserves and maturing obligations in 2026. And at the same time, we're not dependent on the Middle East for either crude oil or refined petroleum products or fertilizers or even LNG. Okay, so now that is a template for interpreting any turbulence coming from anywhere around the world. But this particular one, how did it play out? So I used this word earlier on, the saving grace for the Nigerian economy, what we call resilience factors, include the following. Number one, the bouquet of reforms since May 2023, we are still in it, but if we take a count, you probably will get over 30 elements in the reform bouquet of Nigeria since May 2023. But majorly we talk about first subsidy removal, exchange rate unification, but there are many others on account over 30 as we speak. Then, of course, there's domestic refining capacity that Nigeria has built, which, of course, the key factor there is Dangote Petroleum Refinery, which, of course, has helped Nigeria to move away from dependence on the rest of the world for refined petroleum products to now producing locally and supplying the market. So which means that what we used to do before, 39.1% of our merchandise imports used to be refined products alone, refined petroleum products. But now that figure has reduced significantly. Equally, we have started refining solid minerals. And I'll give you an illustration. Central Bank of Nigeria started buying gold bars. They were refined locally in Nigeria in order to build its buffers, move away from US dollar to some extent, as other central reserve banks were doing all over the world in response to Trump 2.0 and the way it was going with what would likely happen to the US dollar. Now, there's also great supply of fertilizers to global markets. Our share 2 years ago was 0.88%, less than 1%. But there's a projection globally, not just in Nigeria here, that in another 2 years, 2028, Nigeria will become a major player in the fertilizer market. So looking at the new investments being made at Dangote Fertilizer, Indorama, and a number of other fertilizer manufacturers in Nigeria, there's strong external reserves. I will show you the data as at the latest available, which was for last week Friday, shortly. Stable and appreciating currency in all market segments. We see the data also shortly. Then, for the first time in our history, the Central Bank of Nigeria also introduced what we call policy guidance, where the Central Bank governor, in other geography, they call them chairman of the Federal Reserve, will come out and give a statement that informs what the market should expect in the near term. Our Central Bank governor said for the rest of this year, there is no reason for Central Bank to devalue the naira. So he said plainly, no devaluation. That happened for the first time. But in Central Bank, we call it the economics of central banking. Okay? We call it policy guidance. It helps business people plan because you can now work out your plans and factor in there that naira will not lose value, which means the trend we are seeing that began in November 2024 will be sustained for the rest of the year. I will show you shortly why we in BA Consult also agree with him that there will be no reason to devalue the naira for the rest of the year. Then positive business confidence. And of course, going from there, I now said, to put things in proper perspective, when this Middle East crisis began, the conflict, how did different countries around the world respond to that development? They came with different policies, which of course included change of energy trade direction that is imported from somewhere else, which is why what elevated Dangote refinery to a level where it became a major supplier of Jet A1 fuel, that's aviation fuel, globally now, not just to Africa or Europe, but globally, okay? And of course, scarcity management. Many countries introduced first subsidies, ladies and gentlemen, and even tax cuts in response to this crisis. In some others, they introduced price controls. Some introduced policies to reduce the demand for refined products. Some, of course, now took closer look at their strategic reserve and made adjustments. Equally, targeted assistance, and then some supply-side actions, some price monitoring, some, of course, pursuit of alternative trade routes, and, of course, establishment of an emergency crisis committee. Okay? What now are the specific economic policy responses? In Philippines, in South Korea and Japan depended on Middle East for supply of these products I mentioned, especially crude oil, refined products, and LNG, to the extent of 90 and 70% respectively. Japan 90%, South Korea 70%. So you can now appreciate why they will launch this kind of policy. South Korea, nationwide energy saving campaign, calling on people to ride bicycles for short trips and even reduce the length of showers. Because for you to spend so much time in the shower, that means there's electricity that is powering that shower to bring the water out. Okay? The government went to that kind of detail. Japan, Thailand, Vietnam announced similar energy saving campaign. Spain implemented a 5 billion euro relief plan. Italy returned extra tax revenue from fuel back to consumers. So Central and Eastern European countries such as Croatia and Hungary implemented price caps on fuel. Germany introduced a bill that would limit the frequency of fuel price increases. Nigeria, of course, intensified support for domestic petroleum refinery. Morocco, 2 billion in its budget to provide subsidies. Ghana suspended fuel surcharges in April after the inflationary shock waves. Central and Reserve banks froze policy rates. In fact, the Fed in the US is meeting this week, and there is already an indication by different members of the board that they will either increase rate, but at the very worst, leave policy rate where it is, because inflation in the US is not subsiding, as some of their members argued. So, of course, we know what we have done in Nigeria. Let's now come home, okay, and take now a closer look at our own economy. What did this economy look like? Some part of it Friday last week, some just today, because I updated this based on market data as of today. So I have market data on the stock market. I have also for today on the oil market, the price of Nigeria burning light. Of course, for the exchange rate, what CBN had at the time I was finalizing this was still data for Friday. So every other thing was as of Friday last week. Okay. Now, the economy grew by 3.89% first quarter of this year. What does that mean? Faster than first quarter of last year, 2025. Of course, when we played that back, that made us now review our expectation for the rest of this year. When we did outlook for the Nigerian economy at the beginning of this year, we had an expectation of 5.1% GDP growth rate for this year. But based on this strong growth rate for this first quarter of this year, relative to how the economy grew in the last 5 years, typically we take post-COVID, because the way economies behave all over the world, not just Nigeria, post-COVID is totally different from the way they behaved pre-COVID. So we spend more time, therefore, interpreting data post-COVID. Now, if we look at that for the Nigerian economy, what it suggests is that it will grow faster than what we expected at the beginning of the year. As of last week Friday, official exchange rate was 1362.09 to $1. That means if you compare that with end of 2025, the Naira appreciated by 5.41% so far this year. We now went to the parallel market. Of course, the data I have of parallel market here, that's the black market as called it at times, was as at today. The Naira in the market today, parallel market, was priced at 1,412 Naira 50 kobo to $1, which means even the parallel market, the Naira appreciated so far compared to end of last year by 5.49%. But when we compare the two rates, we call it premium. What the difference between official rate and parallel market? The premium as of today was 3.7%, which is less than the maximum 5% recommended by IMF. And why that recommendation? The idea is that if the difference between those two rates is too wide, people will become desperate to get access to official dollars and go to offload at the parallel market. So if we create what we call a strange opportunity, and then round tripping will begin. Round tripping weakens the currency. And of course, if that gap is also too wide, it can also lead to currency speculation. So that all of that has been eliminated since November 2024 up until date, when Naira has been fairly stable within a narrow band. The CBN Monetary Policy Committee met last week and they left rates unchanged, not unexpectedly, because many of us, they had their opinion about this before the meeting held. We said CBN will not, the MPC will not change the rate. For obvious reasons, too. Now, Naira has been stable, but inflation rate ticked up in response to that Middle East conflict. So the rate of inflation in Nigeria went up in March. It went further up in April, and then in May, it got to 15.93% in May, but it dropped marginally to 15.91% in June. So, which means we have not seen inflation completely go out of control as it happened in other countries around the world. So, but CBN still said, even at that, we need to be cautious. So instead of reducing policy rate, we keep it where it is. But even that rate has two interpretations. Number one, for investors. Number two, for borrowers. So if you are a borrower, that rate will hit you on the negative side, adverse side, because it means lending rates that will be paid would remain elevated. And of course, looking at the data too, even though maximum lending rate, as officially reported by banks to CBN, dropped marginally in June compared to what it was in May. I updated the data also today. It reduced to 33.13%. It was about 34, 35%, prior. So what this also shows is that lending rate remains elevated. How about investment? It will still make Nigeria an attractive investment destination because the return on Naira investment instruments still remain very high. See, their returns index the MPR. That's this MPR at 26.5. They index it. So that means that it will still be attractive to investors, domestic and foreign. And that shows also in our capital quotation. Take that also to the stock market. What is happening there? As of today, when the market closed, the index was 246,943.98 points compared to where it was end of last year. It means if your investment in Nigeria mimics the stock market, you should have, at the end of business today, recorded 58.69% return on your investment. That is high by any standard. In fact, in June this year, for the first time ever, the Nigerian stock market outperformed South Korea Kospi. And of course, growing a return then of 66%, which was greater than that of Kospi, that had always dominated the best dollar return stock market globally. So in June this year, the Nigerian stock market was the most, let me say, rewarding for investors, even in dollar terms, anywhere in the world. Okay? So we then say that if you're an investor, it makes a lot of sense to benchmark the stock market year-to-date return as your target primarily. How about external reserves? As at Friday, that was 24th of July, the 30-day moving average published by the central bank was $52.02 billion. Of course, if you look at that and check the historical data, that figure, the last time we saw anything like that in Nigeria was in January 2009. And that was 17 years ago. Now we are counting 17 and a half years ago. Okay? Then we have seen this kind of figure last. Then we now say, okay, the portion of it that is liquid, which is not blocked, if we compare that to our monthly import bills, how many months covered do we have? Again, I checked that out. It gave me 13.15 months. How many months covered do we need to maintain a stable exchange value of our currency? IMF recommends 3 months cover, and we have 13.15. Now, if you have more than 4 times the minimum cover we require to have a stable foreign currency. Even also, the oil sector has improved significantly. We produced in June at 1.735 million barrels per day, which was above our OPEC quota, and also better than the preceding months of May at 1.7 million barrels per day. As of today, the price of body light, or let me say the Nigerian crude, okay, as published today by CBN, was $94.42 per barrel. So if you take a look at all of these statistics, what they point to is a stable microeconomy. And that's the kind of environment that investors want to put their money in. So you can understand why capital importation is growing in Nigeria. Now, people say, oh, this is growing. It's mostly foreign portfolio investment. But I also correct them that there's a lot of FDIs that are not reflected in the data we see now. This data is dated anyway, because this was the first quarter of this year. A lot has happened between the second quarter and even this third quarter that just recorded 1 month. So by the time this data come out, from the ones we know, let me put it that way, as consultants, certainly FDIs are also improving. What about the trend? Our MC mentioned earlier on that when you are interpreting an economy as a business person looking for opportunities, you don't waste your time on what data says as of today. Rather, you give attention to trends. And that is what I've done here, and 2 other slides that follow this. This is how our economy has behaved in the last 13 years. That's from January 2013 up until March 2026. That straight line there, we call it trend line. That trend line is sloping upwards. Okay? That means the economy has maintained steady growth despite the recessions of 2016 and 2020. But it is still vulnerable to external shocks because oil market variabilities can affect it, and investment dynamics which comes with, if there's confidence, a question of confidence, then foreign portfolio investors will troop out the same way they trooped in. But I will flash back to 2008 to explain that. Now, that was when Nigeria hit the historical record of external reserves. We grew our reserves to as high as $64 billion. Okay, in 2007. Then 2008, the global financial crisis happened, GFC, as you called it. Between April that year and November, Nigeria was hemorrhaging. That means foreign investments were going out of Nigeria. Now, at a meeting then, I was selected as one of the professionals to meet with the CBN governor in November 2008. And then he presented the data to us, and he said CBN was going to devalue the Naira because 40 other countries around the world had devalued their currency. So I challenged it. I said, must Nigeria copy what other countries are doing? Simply because they devalued their currencies, must we? It was then Professor Soludo, okay, very brilliant economist, and I like him so much, okay? So he said that it will make us now understand why CBN took that position. So he brought out the data, and that showed us that from oil, which was a major external earnings, foreign earnings, we were realizing about $3 billion monthly. But the hemorrhage, money leaving Nigeria on the average, was about $7 billion. So I said, oh, that means a net capital outflow of $4 billion monthly. So I did a back of the envelope calculation. April to November, that will give me about 7 months. If I multiply 7 by 4, That give me $20 billion. Troop that up now. Okay, now I can understand. So, but the reason the economy did not unravel at that time was because we had solid external reserves. So something similar is playing out now. We have built the reserves, which is good for the economy. And also, it's not the reserves are not largely about foreign portfolio investment. So even if they choose to move now, the economy will not collapse, so to say. Okay. But what we see today still makes a strong case for the government to continue to pursue diversified external sector. This is how the economy looks like now. I always use this. I developed this about 11 years ago as a way of showing people that we've been interpreting the Nigerian economy wrongly by saying the economy is not diversified. This is a proof using data that the economy is diversified. What is not diversified is our foreign earnings, which is also improving now, especially with Dangote refinery now refining crude oil locally, as we don't need to spend money buying refined products, but it still imports crude anyway, which is why government has been desperate. The president signed several executive orders, has signed up to 9, that will improve domestic production of crude oil so that we can have space to be able to supply domestic refineries. But if you look at this chart, it shows you 19 sectors that aggregate 43 activity groups. Which ones are the major contributors? Number 1, agriculture, 33.2% first quarter of this year. That was quite significant. But the challenge there is that the productivity is low, which connects to food security that I mentioned earlier on. The second one turned out to be trade at 17.9%. Then, since 2025, January, we have seen real estate put in its proper position. Real estate is number 3 on the chart with 13.1%. That should tell you something. And then following real estate is ICT. That used to be either number 2 or 3 before. Okay. Then we have manufacturing at 9.6%. And of course, we then see others like finance and insurance and so on and so forth. Now, that gives you an idea of where value is being created, because this chart is about value. So if you want to answer that question, where is value being created in Nigeria? These are the sectors. So which of them are you in? So what value did your own organization create? How does it compare to the value reported in this by the National Bureau of Statistics in this particular publication? So that will give you your share of the market where you operate. So the question is, how do you grow that? And I will come to that before I finish. Now, all these charts show you trends, as I said earlier on. What the trend with external reserves from May 23, when President Tinubu came into office, up until Friday, later data available. What has been the trend? That's what you see there. Exchange rates, okay, when they unified, the rate went up significantly. But after they managed the, topsy-turvy that followed that, the rate stabilized, as I said earlier, within a narrow band. And of course, oil prices and oil production and export. What about inflation? You can see the black stick line there is trending downwards, which means if you look at Nigeria's inflation from December 2022 up until June 26, it's been trending downwards. But what you see there are the actuals, all items, and then food. How about stock market? I've spoken about that. That's the chart there showing the trends. Again, business confidence, performance managers index, PMI, again shows clearly that it's likely been above 50%. 50 points. Once it's above 50 points, that means there is a positive confidence about the economy and business environment. I spoke earlier about lending rates, you see it there. So now this is where the pointers also, add to what I've said. We see the sectors that contribute most. So if you are thinking of a new business, the sector that contribute most should be your first attraction. Second attraction, which sectors were the fastest growing? I picked the top 5 between 2021 and 2025, which were electricity and air conditioning, water supply and sewerage, ICT, finance and insurance, human health and social services. You'll be amazed if you put your satellite on healthcare in Nigeria. How many foreign entities are setting up specialist hospitals in Nigeria? and they are making a lot of money. In fact, let me say it because I didn't put that slide in this deck. The High Commissioner for EU for Nigeria and ECOWAS made a statement early June this year. He said, foreign investors are making serious money in Nigeria and that they are all happy about the reforms that Nigeria has introduced. Quote and unquote. That was exactly the way he said it. They are making serious money in Nigeria. So now, first quarter of this year, which sectors grew the fastest? That's why I painted them red in this particular slide. Arts and entertainment, ICT showed up again. Water supply and storage also showed up again. Finance and insurance, then transportation and storage. So if you are talking of opportunities, I've given you 2 hints on where to search for. Sectors that contribute the most, sectors that are growing fastest, and then the next one I will show you the plan of the government going forward. But what are the expectations for this year? From BA Consult 4.59, from the World Bank and IMF 4.1%, Central Bank 4.49, NSG 5.5%. But the basic thing is that everybody is upbeat about this economy this year, that this economy will grow faster than it did last year. And in fact, it will likely be one of the fastest growing around the world. That by the time you take the top 10, that's a growth rate. So if that is the case, bring it home. How is your own business growing? And this is the way I interpret it. If your business is growing slower than the Nigerian economy, some entity somewhere is growing at your expense. And that's where I will wrap up shortly. Okay? What are the consensus view on this? Cautious to moderate optimism. All major forecasters signal positive GDP growth trajectory for Nigeria in 2026. Of course, where does now these are the details from BA Consult. This is what we did. You can see the update. Now 4.59 improvement from 4.51 we did at the beginning of the year. NPR we said would drop to 24.5 at the beginning of the year. But now, given what Trump started in Iran, we are seeing central bank not having what we call the monetary easing space that were identified in January. And so we may likely get not more than 50 basis points shaving of the NPR for the rest of the year. Inflation rate will not go single digit as we are projected at the beginning of the year, because nobody knew that the disruption that came from Middle East will happen. So we are looking at 14.45. Interest rates, minimum lending rate. Of course, exchange rate. You can see our projection is still around the figures that we are looking at now. Why do we expect 14.15? Because that's greater than the rate as of today. Because we see the economy continue to grow, and if it is growing, there will be demand for some foreign inputs along the line, and that will sustain some bit of pressure. But even at that, the exchange rate will still be within the same range we have seen since November 2024, as I said earlier on. The third part of identifying opportunities is to look at what is the plan of the government for this year and the next 4 years. Okay, diversify the economy, focus on industrialization and manufacturing, deepen revenue and fiscal reforms, monetary policy and exchange rate management. I got a note on the platform I belong to from the finance minister this morning, where he shared with us a picture and summary of the conversation he had with the CBN governor on Friday. So, which speaks to a stronger collaboration between the monetary and fiscal authorities. It's something we have been advocating for, but now the reality is coming on very strongly. Capital market development, job creation. So which sector should we pay attention to? Government says we are focusing on energy and agriculture. So what are you doing with opportunities in that space? A lot of funds put out by the federal government of Nigeria and even foreign development partners, okay, in the energy space, especially in the area of energy transition. Why won't you interrogate that and see whether there's some space for you to also play in that emerging and evolving opportunity? Manufacturing and trade, innovation into economy. So what should you do? 4 things I said there, implications for business. Inflation trajectory. Inflation will still remain elevated. I said that earlier. Exchange rate dynamics, yes. Exchange rate will still remain stable. interest rate environment will still be elevated. Policy risk management, regulatory shifts will remain frequent. So smart businesses will monitor fiscal policy, tariff changes, CBN circulars as actively as they track their P&L. So policy intelligence is now a core strategic capability. So what do we do? What should be your response? Question is, you must deliberately and intentionally build a strong bridge in your organization. We call it the bridge of resilience that will enable your organization to withstand turbulence. But making it very simple is about having your best bet against rising cost of this business being to grow revenue. That means this is not a time to complain. This is not a time to sit back and say, well, the government has messed this up. It's about taking a very good look at the business environment and asking yourself, what should you do? I told a story in Abuja on Saturday on how my friend got into microfinance sector 14 years ago, where we are now the dominant consultant in that sector. What happened? The leading microfinance bank in the sector in Nigeria, Lapo Microfinance Bank, the founder and CEO then, he has also retired by policy that limits term of CEOs. He said the previous year, being 2011, Lapo made profit of over 600 million. And I said, Microfinance Bank made that kind of profit in this environment. And my company as an advisory company is not doing business with them, then something will be wrong with my business strategy. So I waited for him to finish. When he finished his presentation, I did my own before him. When he finished, I went to greet him. Oh, that was a very good presentation. But while he was still speaking, I went to ransack the website of his bank. Okay? Then I discovered some interesting things. So when he finished, after the pleasantries, telling, that was a fantastic presentation. I said, you know what? When you made that statement about the profit your bank made last year, I went on your website. I observed that you also have invested a lot in training your staff. I saw that your management staff, you'll be sending them for offshore training programs. And I have an offshore training program in the Gambia in 2 weeks' time. Maybe it interests you. Say, well, do you have a copy of the flyer there? Maybe I can send 2 or 3 of my staff. I said, where? Microfinance Bank. He didn't even ask what is the cost per person. He said he will send 2 or 3 for a program price in US dollars. I said, there's something is wrong with the way I set for opportunities that made me unable to identify Lapo as a target, customer. That was how the story began. So from Lapo, our footprint extended to every notable microfinance bank in Nigeria. So, and that is how you grow revenue. That means you look out for every opportunity. When you listen to people, you listen to the news, you read some stuff. What are they saying to you? Again, going back now to where we started from, what do you see and how do you interpret it? Very important. So that's why I refer to myself as a Job 22-29 man. And what does that mean? It says, when some say there's a casting down, I will say there's a lifting up for me in Christ. And that's the way it goes. So I don't waste my time on problems and challenges. I rather spend my time on scoring the environment for opportunities. And what can I do to expropriate those opportunities? That's all I do. Every day I wake up. So, and that's why also we leave you with this one, the final take today. Everything is going to be fine in the end, full stop. If it is not fine, then it is not the end. Which simply means you keep searching. You don't give up on opportunity. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Depending on the time available, I can then take questions and comments. So over to you, the MC. Thank you.
Thank you. When will the benefits of the old reforms affect the common citizens? Okay, so Prof, I was expecting that question because, a lot of times, sir, when we listen to this analysis, experts tell us inflation is dropping, but people on the streets are screaming and they're saying, we're not feeling it. So it'll be good to know, sir, when will everyone or when will the common citizens feel the effects? Okay. Somebody says, thank you, sir, for the great presentation. I have problems. believing Nigerian data because of the antecedent of manipulation. However, sir, how do we reconcile improvements in national macroeconomic variables and reserves, which are not reflecting in the living standards of the populace? It's like the same question again, sir. And then, okay. Yes, no, sir, somebody will pick your details. Yes. Okay. Another question says, a lot of growth projections assume SME expansion, but if cost of funds remains at 30%, where do you see the real capital coming from? Banks, DFIs, or private equity? For businesses in essential services or manufacturing, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And Prof, lots of kudos and appreciation. I just keep all of that because I know that if we were paying you for this time, it would be very expensive. So I'm trying to make sure we get all the information we can get from you for free on this call. Yes, sir.
All right, let me respond to the three questions. Although, like you remarked, which I also observed, the first two questions are similar, but I'll still address them anyway. The first one is a very common question and expected. We economists call it trickle down. And that means if you reform any economy, and this is historical anywhere in the world, the first benefit we see in reforms is at the macro level, and that is what we call stability. And I will give you quickly an idea of where we were compared to where we are, and use only two elements to illustrate that. As at early 2023, Nigeria was borrowing money to pay every bill whatsoever, including borrowing to pay interest on borrowed funds. It was that bad. So, but of course, that also led the previous administration to pledge future oil production and borrow in exchange. So, which was part of what the current government inherited. We are producing oil, yes, but we could not realize the revenue from that because part of the oil we are producing had been pledged to repay some loans taken by the previous government. That was where we were. Now, that's one side. So we are practically printing money, which of course resulted in a little over 30 trillion naira waste and misadvances from central bank. We call it in economics hot money. So what we also see as inflationary pressures was contributed to by the way the previous government borrowed money recklessly, I would say, from the central bank. And central bank also did not follow the law. Because if it followed the law, there were provisions as to the limit central bank should go to in lending to the government, which central bank completely disregarded. Okay? So when we therefore talk today about the federal government sovereign debt, it increased significantly. We often forget that there's a 31 trillion naira that was waste and misadvances of the previous government taken from CBN that has now been securitized and now added to what we call today the sovereign debt. That's one side. On the other hand, external reserves. We had a net position of external reserves of $3.4 billion. Net position, $3.4 billion. And we're owing about $7.2 billion on forward contracts that we did not extinguish. That's matured obligations. So both domestically and externally, we were in a very precarious situation. So if we are continuing along that line without the reforms, we wouldn't be talking about the things we are talking about today. Nobody will talk about trickle down. Okay? But even at that, with the reforms, yes, we see clearly the economy has stabilized. But then, from my own perspective, and that's why I started by saying, you need to look, see, and then interpret. My own personal interpretation is that there is trickle down already happening that people don't acknowledge. And I'll give you examples. Number one, if there is road construction and there's concrete road construction all over the country, not just Lagos, Calabar, everybody knows about. There are concrete roads everywhere in Nigeria under construction. Now, every contract you award for a road, it creates a lot of economic activities and revenue for everyone involved in the value chain, starting from those who supply the materials, the construction materials. Then you talk about the contractor itself as a corporate entity. You talk about the employees that work there and also get paid wages and allowances, salaries, as the case may be. Now, all of those are trickled down that people disregard when we talk about, reforms. Okay, that's on the one side. Now, as I mentioned also at the beginning, I excluded that slide. I actually have a slide that summarizes the reforms that have taken place. I call them policy shifts. Okay, one of them, for example, is NEL Fund. We, in our own days in the 1970s in the universities, we enjoyed student loans before it was cancelled. Part of the reform was when this government brought it back. But it is now designed better than at our own time. Because now, yes, the loan then was interest-free. This one is also interest-free. But they now added something that, look, apart from the government paying the school fees of the beneficiaries, each of them will also receive 20,000 naira monthly, which is a stipend that is free. It's not loan. That one is free. So my interpretation is simply this. If my child was in the university and now a beneficiary of NEL Fund, that means the money I would have brought out of my pocket to pay his or her school fees, I no longer need to use it for fees. I can use it for something else. Because government takes care of that with an interest-free loan. That my child will only start to repay when he or she gets a job, salaried. Otherwise, no repayment. But don't forget, the amount is frozen, no interest. Okay? So now, whoever is benefiting from that is indeed enjoying trickle down. That's benefit of reform. Okay? Number three, I will pick on credit corp, because these are things I've been involved with personally, so I can speak to them. The first time Nigeria launched Nigerian consumer credit policy was 2007. That was my first visit to Aso Rock when Obasanjo launched that policy, 2007. Okay? But we never implemented it until this regime came with the reforms of the credit corporation, which they now set up as an institution that will now implement a refined and redesigned consumer credit policy. What does that do? If I need to borrow money to buy, let's say, a vehicle, to buy a laptop, to buy phones, and anything I need to do business, I can approach Credit Corp, borrow that money at an interest rate less than what banks are charging. Because that particular reform says any loan you get from Credit Corp will be at 2/3 of what banks are charging. I actually tested in February last year, ladies and gentlemen. I applied to them for a loan to buy 2 vehicles. Okay, I had my own equity. And I said, I wanted it different. They said, okay, the way it is structured is that the loans are given to individuals, not organizations. So, okay, fine. Who are your main participating banks? They named them. They refer me to EcoBank. So I opened an account with EcoBank. My daughter marries a firm now, also opened an account because the 2 vehicles were for the 2 of us. So we opened, personal accounts. Now, in trying to test that, we put out the equity for the 2 cars. And so they gave all the terms, which was what I was after. Which now confirmed to me that why the banks we had approved for vehicle loan offered us 36% per annum facility. Credit Corp offered us 24%. So that made me go, okay, so this thing is real. Which means if you are a borrowing customer of Credit Corp, you're also enjoying trickle down. That's the reality of it. Because you're accessing a loan at a cheaper rate than what you pay for the same loan you took it from a commercial bank. All right. The rate is even higher with microfinance banks. So now, those are just 3 examples. There are many others. So the question now is, if you access loans from Bank of Industry, for example, Development Bank of Nigeria, Quick Intervention Fund, you are borrowing money at less than 10%, ladies and gentlemen. Even for some funds, you can still get them at maybe 14% thereabout. 14 compared to 36 commercial rates. Ladies and gentlemen, that is trickle down. So there are many things we ignore. And of course, for those who benefit from several projects in the agri space as well, they don't talk about it, but those are the realities of the environment we operate in. So for me, therefore, what I always advocate for when I engage government officials on this is that I acknowledge that the reforms done have brought stability at the macro level. I also acknowledge that trickle down is happening. But can we expand it and deepen it? For example, NEL Fund. If more children and universities can benefit from it, that is deepening that trickle down. Okay? If more people have access, and that is what Credit Corp wrote out last week. They wrote out a new phase and said, okay, we are now going to, expand the breadth of those that benefit from our loans. Okay, I said that is good because that's what I advocate for. So quick means trickle down is happening, ladies and gentlemen. But can we also have that deepened and expanded? That is direction, not to say there's no trickle down. Now, talking about data, I've been involved with data in this country for almost 45 years. Okay, postgraduate work experience. So I know what data means. I know what it was like in the days of Federal Office of Statistics, FOS, which was now restructured, remodeled as National Bureau of Statistics. I know what it was like. I know what it is like today. The reality, let nobody deceive you. The quality of data in Nigeria today is by far a lot better, and it is global standards. I can tell you that on my honor. The data we have in Nigeria today is global standards, and I'll give you a reason why. Evidence. Okay? A former finance minister in Nigeria, Mr. Segun Aganga, published a book 2 years ago. My company was involved in the project. We contributed. In fact, we handled the data aspect of it for him. Now, when that book was published, it won award 3 times as one of the best-selling books on Amazon. How did that happen? He said when they sent out the books to international reviewers for fact-checking the data in it, what came back was that every fact in that book was correct. These are global reviewers of international publishers. So that verify the data put out in that particular book. Okay? So when people say quality of data, I just ask myself, where is that coming from? Because I deal with data every day of my life. Okay? And I can assure you that the data you see in Nigeria today is the reality of what it is. You can't contest that we had only $3.4 billion in the pocket some 3 years ago. And now we have liquid $51 billion. You can't contest that. It's like the controversy that came up in 2012. And the media asked me a question. When the then minister, the central bank governor, said Nigeria had no money. And the finance minister said we had money. The media said, okay, you are an economist. You are familiar with both of them. Give us your interpretation. I said, very simple. You are the one that will answer what I told them. I said, when it comes to money, and that will be my final response to that second question on data. When it comes to money, treat the finance minister as your accountant. Treat the central bank governor as your banker. And I asked the people interviewing me, who will you believe if one says we don't have money, the other one says there's no money? The banker or the accountant? So the media anchor said, we believe the banker because the banker sees the actual money. I said, that's my response. So they went away, and everybody took the position of Sanusi Lamido. They said that his position must be correct because he was the banker, the federal government of Nigeria. So when we talk about data, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we always put the source. Then number 3, that growth is based on the assumption of SMEs. Well, there's a whole lot happening there, If I mean, earlier, the MC told us that we had engagements on the tax reforms as well, massive one. But if you look at the reforms as well, what have they done for MSMEs? Exemption, okay, from paying tax. So all of those are helping one way or the other at the bottom of the pyramid. So when we talk about capital, well, I won't go too far into that because that again is a space I operate in. But I'll put it this way. If you are running an MSME company, there are three sources of funding. We call them the three Fs. Okay? Your family, your friends, and then fools. Fools are those who have money and don't know what to do with it. Do a very good proposal. Send to them, and you can get the money out of their hands. I will leave it there. Okay? But I see there's a lot of comments in the, in the box.
Yes. Yes, there are lots of questions.
Yeah, this issue is a very dynamic one. And we have different perspectives too. Mine is just illuminate. That's my job.
So, I mean, Prof, I don't know. Do you mind giving us an extra 15 minutes? Do you have that time?
Oh, I'm available.
Okay. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this meeting should end by 8. But I see we have lots of questions and we don't have these types of opportunities all the time. So we're requesting for an extension by like 20 minutes. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to take advantage of Prof's presence. So please, we committed to 2 hours for these meetings as usual. So please, if you want to stay on and let's attend to these questions, you're welcome. But please, we're not trying to push you beyond the committed time. Okay? Prof, sir, please, we'd also like you to help us take the altar call. You did mention that you're a believer, so we'd like you to do that as well. I will just run through the questions and then maybe, or how do you prefer, sir? Do you prefer to take it yourself or should I read them out?
You can read them out.
Okay, sir. All right. Okay, so I'll read out the questions and then we can take them together. Okay. Okay, so Wale says, how does one get involved in investments from diaspora? It's a bit confusing. Okay, Wale is a personal, so I think I need to talk to you. Can the robust economic outlook Prof painted be durable and sustainable in the foreseeable future? Then thank you, Prof, for the detailed presentation. In the last 3 years, the significance of dollar in our daily affairs have reduced. And this is a major gain to the economy. How can this be, how can this trend be maintained in future years? Okay. And then another one, I have problems believing Nigerian data. I think we've taken that already. There's a question here, sir. We have 3 hectares of land to plow and do ridges. Which fund known to you can we access, sir? Okay. Then kindly, all these monies that Snake is swallowing, people are already looting. Are they not enough to reduce these debts and actually make Nigeria a better place without putting pressure on the common man? Your thoughts, my dear distinguished professor. Then we also have, thank you, Prof, for this presentation as usual. I agree absolutely with your sentiment on the real estate sector, in spite of the challenges in that sector. Indeed, if we aggregate real estate at 12.8% and construction at 3.6%, you are looking at a sectoral aggregate of 16.4% of the GDP. That should tell us something about the opportunity footprint in that sector. It's not part of my responsibility tonight, Mr. Ogunero, but please, sir, I'm stylishly extending an invitation. I think we need to discuss real estate. And I know you are saying yes, sir.
Great. On his behalf, I'm saying yes too. He's my very good friend.
Okay, sir. How do we reconcile the financial infractions and corruption in governance with the great sacrifices being made by Nigerians that are being squandered away? What can the government do through budgetary controls and punitive sanctions to culprits? There's also another question. I would like you to share more thoughts on where are the opportunities in the real estate market, high or middle market, in view of the unavailability of appropriate funding and rising cost of construction, resulting in high selling prices. Okay. I think we really need to talk about real estate, actually, maybe in one of the next couple of meetings. Okay. Again, what is the truth that the budget has not been implemented in the past few years? Is that a myth or a fact, dear Professor? Oh, somebody wants the offering bank account. Okay, I'll bring it back up. Let me just read these questions. I'll bring it back up. In the area of real estate, MREF has disbursed over 200,000 mortgages in the past 9 months or so. This is probably more than 10% of the total number of mortgages ever created in Nigeria. MREF is a great game changer and already trickling down. Okay, this is a contribution from Mr. Akim Oguniro, who is a leader in that sector. Yes, he's a respected leader in that sector. Yes, so 10%, interesting. Okay, so then lots of questions, extremely expository. Well, just for information, how big has been the impact of the Dangote refinery that has commenced operation as the largest single train refinery facility in the world on stabilization of the Nigerian economy in terms of exchange rate stability, reserves aggregation, GDP growth, net positive balance of trade, and even better perception of our economy by overseas investors? Also, how should we prepare as business investors to take advantage of the greater or exponential opportunities and visibility that will come when this refinery eventually doubles? Okay. I see lots of more questions coming. Okay, let me just read everything. But please, after this 4, I'm sorry, I won't take more questions because, you know, I'm not sure what we'll do. Mr. Lusodo will need your help here. Maybe we'll need to have another session. But it seems like this is a very important topic. Thank you so much, Prof, for this. My challenge is fiscal discipline. To me, there is no fiscal discipline. The impact of any reform will be practically zero. Okay, if there's no fiscal discipline, the impact of any reform will be practically zero. It's like pouring water into a basket. This possibility accounts for the reason why the impact is not being felt by the ordinary citizen. Okay? Another question, sir. How do we reconcile the financial infractions and corruption in governance with the great sacrifices being made? Okay, what can the government do? True, but okay, I think I've taken this before. Yeah, I think you wrote it again.
Yes,
okay.
I wrote it down.
I mean, thank you so much, everyone. We won't take further questions. What we'll do is Prof will attend to this, take the altar call, and then probably we'll have another session, depending on Prof's availability. What we did last year was, for people in Lagos, we had a physical Saturday session, closed door, where we could speak freely. Maybe we'll do something like that, but it will be a paid session because we have to put up other supporting facilities for that. All right. Thank you so much. Prof, over to you, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I will take them in the, I will take them in the order the question where my responses are very short and precise. Now, for the person looking at investing too significantly now, in the sense that there are fund managers and different instruments, the important thing is that you need to also make a clear decision of what you want to invest in. If, for example, and there are many, there are also quite a number of asset management companies to look for. If you're going to invest through any particular entity, make sure they are registered with the respective regulatory authority. If it's a fund manager, it won't be registered with SEC, and you can easily confirm that online. Okay, so I don't want to start mentioning names, so it won't appear I'm marketing anyone in particular. So if you want to invest in treasuries, for example, the same process. You can go on any search engine, which are the participating, entities. We get a list, and you can now do your inquiry through that. But there are many such vehicles that you can invest in as someone in diaspora. Even if you want to invest in real estate, there are people also you can contact that will give you very good guidance and direction. Like Mr. Akim Ogunina that was mentioned earlier on as a part of this event. Now, talking about outlook and the foreseeable future, outlook is not something you do now and say it will run like that for the next 5 years. When we do outlook, it is done 4 times in a year. It is not only our firm that does that. The World Bank does the same, IMF does the same, and a good number of entities are coming to that space doing the same thing. But the concept is this: we do an outlook in January, that's for the year we just entered. When we get to April, we update it based on what happened in the first quarter. Then we update again in July, considering what happened in the first half year. Then the fourth one is done in October, that takes account of what happened in the first 3 quarters of the year. So outlook is not something you do now and you go to relax, say, well, I already have an outlook for the next 4 to 5 years. It doesn't work that way. So what you see, for example, in my slide deck is the outlook that World Bank, IMF, BA Consult did this July, after taking into account what happened in the first half of the year. If you look at what World Bank and IMF said about Nigeria, beginning of this year, their projection for our growth this year was 4.4%. They dampened it to 4.1%, okay, making the argument largely on the Middle East conflict. But we made the argument by taking our own up with the realities of what is happening locally. So every entity, therefore, that makes outlook doesn't look into the long term in that manner. It's something you update as fresh data comes out. Now, the reference to a significant drop, let me say reduction in the significance of USD in the last, few months, maybe going to 24 months now, I think it's likely because of the changing structure of the economy and also the fact that there's been significant improvement in dollar inflows. Let me use something to illustrate. As at this time last year, I sent out a warning to central bank management that they should be on the lookout for the period from July to September, because that is when traditionally, looking at the Nigerian data, for the person that thought about data, there is data on everything in this country since 1960 to date. In fact, there was a guest of UK government way back in June 2004, using data to explain Nigeria's economic policy since independence. That was to the British audience. And as a guest of UK government that paid me honorarium for doing that. Okay? So when you talk about data, there's data for everything. It's about where you look and the kind of data you need. So as this person rightly said, so I told CBN management this time last year that if you look at the history of the Nigerian economy, the Naira usually will lose value between July and September for 2 major reasons. Number one, the elite and middle class lifestyle of summer travels. Then secondly, school fees of children schooling abroad, so that the demand for dollars to pay school fees also is intensified over that window. So that if CBN wanted Naira exchange rate to remain stable, then they should be ready to intervene in the FX market over that period. So of course, CBN did that, and the Naira remained fairly stable over that period. But this year, they don't need to worry about that. Why? Because the pocket is stronger, and trade flows, as one of us mentioned, one of the participants have mentioned, have also improved. We have, trade surplus. And all of these are positive things for the economy. The person looking for funds to develop, 3 hectares of land, there are different funds available depending on the, the sector you are looking at. If it's about agriculture, there are different funds in agriculture. So people should just go out and look. You can use a search engine or even any of these AI tools. I did that myself. After speaking at an event like this, I pointed out that focus of government in the next 5 years, that this year inclusive, is on energy. And I said, if I give people an idea of where our point is, what am I doing with that information? So I went on ChatGPT and Claude, and I asked the question, what are the opportunities in alternative energy in Nigeria? I was shocked. how many funds are available in this country? Many of them by federal government of Nigeria, a good number by development partners that are available for those who want to do business in that space. It was shocking for me. But again, that's what I would recommend to you. I won't be the one to give it to you. Just go search it. That's my personal experience when I said on that. And I told myself, I need to look for a business opportunity within that space. Of course, debt reduction, pressure on common man. There's no pressure on any common man when it comes to debt repayment. No pressure on any common man. Sovereign debt doesn't bring pressure on any common man. Ladies and gentlemen. Now, and I will fall back on experience. When President Obasanjo then in office said he was campaigning for debt forgiveness, and they came back with a deal and said, we are owing Paris Club of Creditors $30 billion. That if Nigeria paid $12 billion cash, then they will write off $18 billion. And I said there was no write-off whatsoever. To start with, there's no country in history up until that time that ever paid what it owed once for all. It never happened in history. And the only person, a respected economist, that agreed with me then was Dr. Kaludi Kakalu, KIK. In fact, that was the time he said he was adopting me as his younger friend. He said because he queried it also. So that is number one on the issue of debt, okay? What is done with debt management is to ensure that, and that's what this government has been doing, because we've made so much noise about this as advocates, that please don't borrow money to pay salaries like the Buhari administration did. If we borrow money at all, please borrow for projects. That makes it easy to monitor. That makes it easy to extract value from it. I was in Frankfurt about 4 years ago, and they told us that the train we were on, 40-year-old project, that train was funded by loan that Germany was still paying. I mean, that was, in fact, 2021. As at that time. Germany was still paying a loan taking 40 years before then to build the railway that we were inside the train on the track. So I told myself, so why do we in Nigeria make so much noise about borrowing? If we borrow to deliver projects, it enhances productivity. That's the way I normally put things as an economist. I won't tell you not to borrow, but if you borrow for food, that is dangerous. Because you will eat the food, it will digest, and that's the end of it. But if you borrow to build capacity, you not only be able to repay the loan, but what to deliver with it will still be there beyond the loan repayment. That's the way we look at that as economists. Of course, financial infraction and sacrifices. A whole lot is being done now with technology by this current government, because people like us advocates have been saying this for years. That if you bring technology to this space, you can narrow the opportunity for, corrupt practices, sharp practices. Technology narrowed the space. And happily, I was privileged to be the one to write the business plan for the national ID card in 2008. That is the means you and I carry today. I wrote the business plan, okay? Part of the concept was that if we know how many we are and where we are, we can plan appropriately, then data can also be harmonized. In fact, that was an eye-opener for me. When people talk about data and I challenged them that, look, you can't tell me there's no data in Nigeria. I wrote the business plan in 2008, ladies and gentlemen. There is data on everyone and everything. I can tell you that for free. And let me know, because of time, I won't go into all of those details. But what we see as an opportunity for dealing with bodily control and consequences that you mentioned is to bring in technology into that space. And technology will help you narrow the space for errant behavior. Of course, I've skipped the questions on real estate. My recommendation to the chapter is that we should bring in Mr. Akim Oguniran to talk to that at another meeting. The same thing on budget implementation. Technology is the key thing there. Every disbursements, that's another reform that this government did that I didn't even remember to mention. Since I didn't have that my slide that summarizes everything. Of course, Dangote refinery, I've told you earlier in my presentation, if not for that refinery, this economy will be in turmoil now because of what we'll be paying for refined petroleum products that we are importing. Number one, there'll be disruption to supply, and two, the cost will be prohibitive. So, like the kind of thing that happened in Ghana and a number of other countries and the world, in fact, Sri Lanka is perhaps the worst. Very thin in terms of buffers, and it was still reeling from the crisis. So, essentially, that is a big game changer for Nigeria. And as we speak today, just like Aliko Dangote himself has been saying in some interviews, at some point, that refinery will be generating sufficient dollar revenue, a position to send dollars to the. I don't know whether we are already getting to that as we are today. So it then means that with that refinery, and there are some others coming up, 50,000 barrels plate, another 140,000 barrels plate. The next 1, 2, 3 years, they'll be operational. If we have that here, by all means, that will be a true game changer for Nigeria. And that will help a lot in stabilizing our currency. Fiscal discipline, I've spoken to that. I mean, the key thing there is bringing technology. And then, also talking about budget implication, I always laugh when politicians say the budget was not implemented. I say budget not implemented. So where do they get money to pay those contractors that are doing the roads? Or are the contractors doing the roads for free? So I just laugh when people make that comment. Only 3% of the budget have been implemented. I say, for where? How can that be? Are they not paying salaries of their employees? The government is owing nobody salaries and allowances. Not only that, they are doing projects here and there. Are the contractors not being paid at all? Are the employees not being paid and they kept quiet? So by all means, it's a political statement. So I don't believe in all sorts. I interpret what I see and hear. So that makes me decide what to accept and what to ignore. So I think that's about the last question there. So thank you very much. So peradventure, there's any participant that is here with us today, and you don't have yet a personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, I make an offer to you at this time. This is not a call to join any church. It is a call to a personal relationship that makes the whole difference. And what this means simply is that you want at this point to make a decision. A decision is yours, not influenced by anybody, but it is yours, where you take responsibility that I want someone who knows everything about life, because he is the author of life, to take charge of my life and sit in the driver's seat. He knows tomorrow. I don't know it. He knows the future. I don't know it. So I want him to come into my life and be my master. At one time or the other, many of us here have done that. And that is why we can speak with confidence. I call it the confidence of faith. A confidence that makes you say, according to the word of the Lord, that tomorrow will be better than today, because he already knows tomorrow. So I offer you Jesus this night, and what you will do with me is a simple confession. And please say after me, if you are such person here that doesn't yet have a personal relationship with Christ, say along with me, Lord Jesus, I come to you tonight and I offer my life to you. I invite you to be my Lord, to be my master. Forgive me all my sins, and I receive you as the Son of God, who came to this world and he died for my sins. You rose from the dead. You are alive today. And I ask you to come into my heart. Be my Lord and my Savior. From today, I belong to you. And Satan, hear me. I have no business with you. I belong to Jesus. And from today, I proclaim with strength of faith that I'm a child of God. Thank you, Lord Jesus. I receive this done in Jesus' name. Father, in the name of the Lord Jesus, we thank you, Lord, for as many have made this confession tonight. As they have said, we believe and agree according to your word that have come into their hearts as their Lord and their Master. Give them a token as a proof according to your word that this day they have committed their lives to you. There is a difference you make, and there is something specific we do for them that will mark this change of allegiance in the mighty name of Jesus. I pray, therefore, for everyone at this meeting, that which you desire according to the word of the Lord, that says this God is the one that searches the reins and the hearts of men. It is also written that when a man delights in the Lord, he makes his heart's desires to come to pass. So I proclaim that every of your desire, godly desire of your heart, the Lord will